Golf's not just a game and it's not played on just grass. Lawn Solutions Australia is the home of Australia's best sports turf of varieties. For the world's best grasses like Tiff Tuff, Sir Grange, Primo and Trinity, contact Lawn Solutions Australia at lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. That's lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. Hello and welcome to episode 52 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's ongoing quest to uncover the multitude of reasons people get hooked by and on this crazy game. My name's Rod Morri and today's episode is a real personal treat for me and, I hope ultimately, for you too. In the world of daily newspapers, there's an old saying about how headlines grab attention. Dog bites man will draw very few readers, the thinking goes. But man bites dog? Well, that'll make even the most cynical turn their head. It's the incongruity that grabs people, and I must admit there was a man bites dog element to my initial interest in Edwin Roald. Edwin is a golf course architect. That's dog bites man stuff. But Edwin is a golf course architect from Iceland. Now that is man bites dog material. Add in a fascinating website he developed called y18holes.com, and the movement he spearheaded in Iceland to sanction official tournaments of any number of holes above 7, and Edwin suddenly becomes a man you really want to talk to. Now, over the years, I've had lots of interesting conversations with Edwin about all sorts of facets of golf. In today's episode, we squeezed as much of that as we could into what turned out to be a lengthy conversation that could have been oh so much longer. My guess is that almost none of you listening right now will have heard of Edwin Roald before today. But my hope is that you make the effort to listen to his thoughts and that you, like me, become a fan of Edwin Roald. Well, we'll start as we always do, Edwin, by first saying thank you for your time. It's quite the commitment to do the thing about golf, so we appreciate that.
No, thank you for having me on.
Oh, Edwin, you're far too interesting a person for only me to know about, and I'm hoping that a wider audience will get to hear some of your thoughts on the game. Normally, I start this podcast with the title, and by asking the person what's the thing about golf. With you, I'm going to do it a bit differently. When we think about golf, most of us around the world, we think of the golf hotspots. We think of the UK, Scotland, America, perhaps Australia, Canada a bit. We don't think of Iceland, Edwin. Tell me about golf in Iceland. You've had a lifelong passion for golf, born and raised in Iceland. Tell me about golf there.
Well, yes. I guess it probably is among the most active golfing nations there are. In Iceland, the population is quite small. We are around 350,000, just above that maybe. And in a fairly large country, though, if you look at the population, it's slightly larger than Ireland and England itself, or if something for scale. But we do have more than 60 golf courses, and they're basically distributed or scattered along the coast. I mean, almost every small town along the coast, every old fishing village will have a golf course. And the more I've sort of belonged to the industry and the golf movement in Iceland and beyond, I kind of sense that the popularity of golf owes to maybe, I think, 3 big factors, really. It's number one, okay, like I said before, we do live in a fairly large country, so that we have space. There is land available. So let's say that if there was a group of enthusiasts in a town that wanted to get golf started, it wasn't quite, too difficult for them to get a piece of land somewhere from a farmer or somewhere, to borrow a piece of land. And the other thing is that we can play 7 days of the week after work. A working person, because of the daylight hours from spring to autumn, will have any day of the week to play. So you can finish your work day whether it's 4, 5, or 6 o'clock, and then even have dinner and take the kids with you to go out and play. Because of perhaps the availability of land, many of these courses are quite accessible. So Obviously, that's a huge factor. Obviously, let's say you live in a big city, you're living in the fast lane, you've got a high powered job or whatever, and you're not going to go out and play on a weekday. I mean, it's
probably
traffic.
not a golf course accessible to you in an urban area like big cities.
Yeah, it's also darkness and the traffic and things like that. So, and then I mean, I guess thirdly, it's the climate. I mean, Iceland obviously sounds extremely cold, but the climate is quite mild. The winters are basically just wet. But they are dark actually. But instead, conversely, we've got, like I said, these daylight hours in the summertime, and the climate is like I said, is mild, so that we don't really get these extremes in terms of high temperatures causing stress on the grass plant or big volumes of rain per time unit, per hour or something. So we don't really require these extensive drainage systems as well. Because, let's say if there's a front coming and it's raining all day, nobody's out there playing anyway. So, the course will have all night to drain if you like. So, it's that, I think, and I think actually I think in Australia and New Zealand, you have a certain, there is an element of golf there where you've got like I think what they call in New Zealand, country golf, for example. You've got that more modest sort of approach to the game, where it kind of delivers in greater accessibility, lower cost, and like I said, more time to play. So, so I would even go as far as saying that golf is almost a national sport in Iceland. It's now, in terms of registered players, it's almost catching up to football. So it's currently the second largest sport in terms of participation registered, and probably will be the largest in 2 or 3 years.
That's quite extraordinary. You've outlined beautifully there the reasons why golf might be popular, predominantly accessibility, as you say, and a few other issues, which I think we can all learn some lessons from. But what do we know of the start of golf in Iceland, and how is it that those of us in what we would consider the tradition golfing nations don't know this about Iceland?
It's a good question.
There's two questions there. They're probably two quite big ones.
Yeah, two good ones, yeah. Well, the start, I mean, it was British influence, actually. I think the first written reference to on golf in Iceland is from 1912, where an Englishman was seen, he was out there fishing or angling in one of the rivers in the north, and he was seen hitting some strange balls with strange clubs and things like that along the grounds there, along the banks. And it's then in 1934 when the first club is established, Reykjavik Golf Club, and there were quite few actually to begin with. I mean, still in World War II, there were only 3 clubs in the country. So it's about then, I think, in the post-war years, as with so many other things, there was a surge, I think, in at least in the number of courses, and then I think in 2 other spurts it comes in the mid 80s, and then in just roughly at around 2000, 95, 2000, there's another boom at least in the number of courses, while the number of players has basically multiplied since 2000 roughly.
Okay, fantastic. And why don't we know about Iceland?
It's probably our own fault, I guess.
Don't do anything to change it would be my suggestion. You might be better off without hordes of people coming there. But.
No, not at all. Because I think we would welcome, visitors from abroad to play, because they would have a tendency to want to play at least a lot of the time during the evenings and at midnight, because that's a very sort of a memorable and interesting experience. And it's actually catching on here among the local population, is, going out during summer solstice and going out and play midnight golf, at least once a year. And so that's becoming a thing. So, I mean, we should be able to distribute the play, throughout, around the clock a bit. And, so there shouldn't really be that much conflict. But, in terms of why it's not that well known, I guess, I think the majority of us just even still hasn't realized, I think, the the unique nature of well, I guess they might realize the unique nature of golf in Iceland, but I don't think they realize the attraction in it, and the demand that we know that exists for pure, let's say, golf in its pure form, with the quirkiness like we have seen from courses, for example, in Scotland. One person, sadly I forget who it was, said once that the Icelandic golf courses, especially the rural ones, were more Scottish than the Scottish courses. So I think we what I'm getting at here is that it's that element of the game where you're playing in nature, where you're playing holes that are draped across interesting land, and maybe because of that, there's the odd hole that might look a bit strange or quirky, but would owe its charm to that. So I often think about North Berwick in that respect.
Yes,
especially the back nine.
I'm going to suggest anybody who hasn't done so yet, pause this podcast, go and look at images of golf in Iceland. It's a staggering landscape, Edwin. Adventurous, thrilling-looking golf. Quite extraordinary, the images would suggest. Is that common in Iceland, or are we seeing images of perhaps the more photogenic courses or those that are a little more unorthodox there?
Well, I think the tendency is, for them to kind of find their way at the forefront of the search engines, I guess. But I think what always fascinates me is the tremendous variety in landscapes that we have, not in a bigger place than this. I mean, it also reminds me a lot. Well, having said that, I've been to New Zealand, yes, at the North Island, but I'm told that the South Island is very, very similar to the Icelandic landscape, and I think for those listening in the southern hemisphere, that probably it would be a nice, I think, a good comparison in terms of landscapes. That is, if there were that many golf courses sort of scattered along, across the landscape of the South Island in New Zealand.
Yeah, indeed. So we're going to come back to the question that I normally start with then, Edwin. The thing about golf. What's the thing about golf for you?
Oh, I think that's changed, in all this time. I got into golf in the late 80s. For me, having worked in the industry for more than 20 years now, I've grown very attached to the idea of using golf systematically or in a focused way to bring about various improvements to our communities and our environment. So I see golf as a tool to achieve that. And it can do this in so many ways, which I think many will find surprising. And so that's been my passion for a number of years now. After first having been introduced to the game through Severiano Ballesteros, who, I always remember watching him on TV when I was a kid. I think he was playing Dennis Durnian in the final in the match play. I would like to say Wentworth, but it was in the match play environment. He was in a final. He was pulling out of his hat all these shots around trees and things, and sticking them close, and the reaction of the spectators and the excitement, you could feel it, and that's what he did, I think, with many. He brought people into the game, and so it's thanks to him that I've enjoyed the privilege of being able to work, almost work and play at the same time, almost every day.
Prior to seeing Sevi on TV, what was your connection with golf, if anybody? Did anybody in your family play?
No, none at all.
And had you had any other exposure to golf outside of seeing it on television? Had you played with friends?
No. It was no. It was my first introduction to the game, and I just started speaking to my family about wanting to try it out, and they were very willing to accommodate that. And at the time, which is an interesting thing, it maybe shows you how golf has changed well, at least in this case in our country, is that at this time in the late 80s, it was that more sort of elitist or exclusive sport that you often find when, during the first few decades of golf in any nation, I think. And at the time, you needed to have two people in the club to second you as a new entrant and all that stuff. So it was a very, very different environment, very, very different. So it's basically in the 90s and around 2000, the game transformed into what it is today. It became a truly public sport, and so I mean that's obviously for me having. And what's interesting as well, I think, is that before I got introduced to golf, I was always going to be an architect, a building architect. I was drawing. As a child, I was drawing buildings and things, and after I got into golf, I just thought, of course, why don't I just combine these two? And that's obviously quite blessed having that the development of the game has gone along this direction where it's become such an accessible, widespread game. It's much more fun to belong to something like that than obviously essentially just building playgrounds for, yeah.
We might come back to some of that and the differences and similarities between architecture of buildings and golf course. I want to come back to Sevi. To watch Sevi play golf remains to this day, even though he's no longer with us, an adventure. And golf in places like Scotland, North Berwick, and some of the ones you mentioned earlier, and some places in New Zealand, certainly here in Australia, is an adventurous pursuit. There's a word that comes up often in old writings about golf courses, about sporty. A golf course was sporty. It feels to me like some of the edges have been rubbed off that sort of golf at all levels. If we look to the professional game, there's a lot less. Nobody will ever replace Sevi, obviously. Phil Mickelson perhaps is somewhat of a correlation, but the professional game feels like it has less adventure, less adventurous in the venues they visit so often. Do you feel that? And what impact do you think that's had on golf, those who are drawn to it, and its ability to achieve some of the things that we're going to talk about that you'd like to see, where golf can be a vehicle for something much bigger than just golf?
Yeah, I think I have the same. I have the same feeling. Is that when we're looking, watching professional golf, my understanding of it is that it's essentially the tours, the European Tour, the PGA Tour, other tours, they're essentially owned by the players. I mean, directly or indirectly, depends on your outlook on life, I guess. And because they make a living playing golf. I think they would have a tendency to eliminate all the unpleasant surprises out there. So they wanted what you see is what you get, that kind of thing. So naturally the golf courses will have a tendency to be more mainstream, not as rough around the edges as you often find in public golf. So I think therefore, and then the greens committees at your local club, they will obviously be influenced by what they see on TV. So it kind of has that ripple effect, doesn't it? It kind of brings that sameness throughout. I mean, that's I think what you were getting at. I think that's what's my experience as well. So there is often often a tricky conversation in the club room to try and influence decisions made by the greens committees at existing courses, and not always easy.
Well, many of whom, Edwin, don't understand, will not have read, researched, or really know anything beyond their own prism and the way they view their own game. Any understanding of golf course architecture or its role in the game. And yet they will make decisions, big decisions, about golf courses and design features, things that they would never do in their own profession outside the club. Lawyers who would tell you you can't have someone who's not a lawyer represent you in court. have no problem believing that there's no need for a golf course architect, that they know what's best for their course. It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
Very, very. And I think, well, my feeling is that obviously there's emotions often run high in the club room. You're dealing with people who they mean well. The intention is good. The passion is so great, though, that and often they don't have the luxury of having been involved in the game for decades, even perhaps in a professional capacity, where you're trained almost to let's say almost to remove your emotions, to adopt a certain versatility in terms of styles to fit the environment that you're working in and things like that. Because I think when you've been maybe for a more limited time in the game or attached to the game, there's a greater risk, I think, that you are influenced by what you last saw, for example, on TV. So the tendency is often, I think, it might sound harsh, but it's often like, the Greens committee maybe wants to do what, the Greens chairman saw in his last golfing trip, So that's what they want to replicate out there. That's a bit of an exaggerated scenario, but that's often what it feels like.
There's truth to it, isn't there? One of your architecture brethren, Mike Clayton, has said more than once, and I'm pretty sure he said it publicly, but he certainly said it to me, nobody should be allowed to sit on a Greens committee anywhere in the world if they haven't read The Spirit of St Andrews at least. Do you understand the point he's making there? Yes, and does that make some sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And I've often thought about, the Greens committee person's handbook.
What would be in that, Ed?
Well, we could put at least large excerpts of The Spirit of St Andrews in there. And I think, yes, there would need to be that introduction to the philosophy and history of golf course design philosophy. I think that's a very healthy read, and it's, I think, a very healthy read, a healthy reread for many of us as well, to do that occasionally. And then I think because the world is becoming so complicated, I think, and it's changing so fast, there are now so many factors that we need to consider, because obviously a golf course and golf, it's a land and resource demanding game. There's so many factors that come into play now when you're planning a golf course, whether it's a new course or changing or developing an existing course for the future. And there are even new disciplines being born every 5 years that you didn't know, you never had, imagined could exist. So it is becoming a very, very demanding job because it's our job basically to try and read into the crystal ball a bit and see, what's the world going to look like here in 20 years? Because often, influencing these golf courses, whether it's designing a new one and building it and then, or completing a redesign, it takes many, many years. And the risk of your design being obsolete on opening day is quite high.
Quite a motivator, I would think, Edwin, that would keep you awake at night sometimes.
Well, yeah, and I think, it is a very, very unique discipline, in terms of the size of the sites that you're working with, the environmental impact, the impact on people's lives around you, and obviously the time it takes to develop the thing. So
it's a huge undertaking, a golf course. This is to build a golf course. It's like an enormous art project. You can see these things from aeroplanes.
Yeah.
Okay, it's quite staggering when you think about it, and if you were to think about it that way, it might be quite daunting to consider it in that way, I would think. I want to take you back, Edwin. You mentioned that your thing about golf had changed over time. I want to ask you, what was your thing about golf when you first started? You said you watched Seve and that appealed to you. You went to try the game and something about the game obviously appealed to you. What was that? And is it important for all of us to remember that? What first drew us to the game, because that's what's going to draw the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, isn't it? If we lose the things that drew us to the game, we can lose the things that might draw the next generation to the game too. So what was it that drew you way back then?
You ask a very good question, I think. I'm not sure if I have you have to dig deep a little bit, to try and wonder, what it really was that was so charming about it. Is that obviously when I came into it, that's during my, I'm 12 years old.
12, okay.
Yeah.
So sporty minded, athletic. You would have played other sports,
yes,
no doubt.
Yes,
team sports. And
it's performance driven to a degree. It's also, I think, the unique element of it being out there on your own. It's the competition with yourself, and the course, obviously, but more, I think, within your own mental sphere, basically, and yeah. So I think that's. It's tough to, I think, put your finger on exactly what it was, but it's all those elements, and obviously helped by the fact that I was able to go out there and there was room on the golf course. I think as a kid I could go out and play the main golf course. Today I see kids, perhaps willing to try it out. They see golf on TV and they are drawn to it. But because of the traffic that now exists on the golf courses, especially in and around the city, they are almost confined to playing in simulators or on the driving range or a fairly bad short course, and they rarely get to play the actual golf course. And I think that's where I obviously was able to get to have my desires fulfilled to play the course. And I had seen my home course on TV. There was a match play event that I saw, so I knew it a little bit, and so it was interesting as well to finally be out there on the course that I'd seen on TV. And but I often worry that the kids today, they don't get that same fulfillment, and which might cause them to leave the game or hopefully pick it up later on. But I now worry about. I might be taking this answer a bit sort of off road here, but I worry that golf in the urban environment is being pushed out to the countryside that much, not only in Iceland but across the world, obviously, and so that the young generation's ability to get introduced to golf will be diminished. So, and the impact that will have, I don't know. I guess it's unknown, but it worries me a bit.
And you're absolutely right. It's certainly something we have here. We have people who campaign, in fact, to remove urban golf courses from the urban landscape, shift them away outside into the suburbs where there's more space, and use the golf course space for something else instead. And they find a lot of people agreeable to that notion, and golf is not doing enough quickly enough to defend its position, I don't think, and we're going to come to some of that in a moment. It strikes me while you're talking there, Edwin, accessibility is essentially what you're talking about there, and I think that's true probably in most Western countries where golf is played. We find that those who live in the rural areas outside the big cities have much more access to golf courses, and we tend to find our best players who end up on television tend to come from those areas, not from the suburbs of the big cities. The other thing that strikes me is, and we sometimes forget this, I think, when we're in the business, Edwin, unlike other sports, golf is a business top to bottom. Most sports are a business at the professional level, but they're a recreation elsewhere across the board. The agenda is different for those involved in administration, etc. Golf has a very large business top to bottom. We forget the word play. We play golf. That's the appeal. We play at golf. I'm as guilty of it as the next person. We sometimes take it too seriously, don't we? Golf.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you're making. But yeah, I think I think we have a tendency to forget about that. But having said that, I mean, it's also interesting to, we just talked about new disciplines being born every 5 years. There's a new one. One of the new ones is called environmental, psychology, and it tries to quantify those experiences, right? Because golf is like we've talked about. It's a unique game in many ways, and it's. I think I often kind of liken it to probably what hunting used to be for us back in the day when we were in the Stone Age, and is that you're out there, you're actually battling the elements. You're reading into the environment. You're reading into the elements. You're sent out there, to actually get a result and come back with a result. So, you're sent out there like you were, from the cave, you went out, you have to get your prey, and then you're judged on what you come back with. So it's like you have to read into the weather, read into the environment, make a decision, execute, and then there's a result, and you can't hide it when you come back in, so either you got your prey with you or you don't. And that's probably a deeply human element. And so I guess golf taps into that a little bit. And yes, there is the adventure element there. But I've become fascinated with, like I said, this new discipline of environmental psychology. Is that, but yeah, because you said something interesting there about, we're working, yeah, but we're also playing. But it's trying to get your hands on and really understanding what it is to where people's playfulness is allowed to sort of is set free, and what it is really in the landscape and in the land and in the appearance of it that makes your heart beat. And I don't know if I don't know if I'm getting this across, is that because I guess maybe as architects, I think we have a feel for what it is that makes people excited. We gets them excited, but it's when you have to prove it to your client that having, building the course this way instead of that way would be more fun. So it's nice to have, if we can use a discipline like environmental psychology to quantify those experiences and to actually tell them, here, this would be more fun than this. So, because you have to communicate obviously to your client. That's a big part of, being able to build what you think will be the most fun to play. So, yeah.
It might be a bigger part than the ideas themselves of what makes golf fun to play, might it not? Or what might make a great hole is the convincing of those with the funds that it's the
communication
right
aspect of it that is tremendously important. It's not only conceiving the ideas themselves. That's often the easy part. The more you work in this area, in this field, it's communicating them to the one who has the final say, and obviously holds the wallet, and
which is the key to everything, isn't it? Because without the wallet, you don't get to build anything at all. You said when you were growing up you wanted to be an architect, a building architect, and when golf became your passion, that you'd switched that, and it seemed a natural move to go to golf course architecture. Of course, the two are very different, aren't they? What are the similarities? What drew you to building architecture? And in hindsight, was that a sensible thing to think that you could transfer your interest from building buildings to building golf courses?
Oh yeah, I don't know. The feeling is that there wasn't so much thinking behind it. It's just something that I just was drawn to. I think in drawing buildings and it was just some kind of a creative desire. I don't know if it mattered that my grandfather, whom I spent some time with at the time, was a carpenter, and the terminology escapes me in English. The one who is a master of building houses, basically.
A craftsman, a master builder.
A master builder, yeah. So yeah, that's what he was. And
was it the creative side of drawing buildings, or did the engineering aspect of building?
No, it was the creative.
Did you,
I think
so it wasn't. Yeah. You didn't care how it was held up. It would just look good if it looked like this, and then somebody else could figure out how to make sure it didn't fall down. Okay,
exactly. I think that was the thing.
And many builders will still tell you that architects are still like that to this day. They hand them drawings for buildings. The builders tell them, you can't build it. It's impossible.
You often hear that. But that's also what keeps innovation going in engineering.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But
because golf courses have a similar aspect, don't they? There is an engineering element to golf.
Oh, yeah.
And golf course design, which most who have an interest in the field who aren't golf course architects have no understanding of and never give a thought to.
Yes. And that's what really interesting, I think, to me in golf now is that I love actually gathering all the constraints so that I can see them in front of me. Because let's say that when you're trying to design something, I think you're better off, I think, visualizing the whole construction sequence when you're doing it, because you might say that, okay, to build this, I will need much more soil in this area, or, to raise this area or of the site, and where can I get it? Can I get it somewhere nearby? Can I even get it within reach for a bulldozer where there's only one guy and one machine pushing it? Or will I need to go get it by excavating it onto a haul truck, hauling it and then dumping it and then spreading it? So I need 3 guys on 3 machines. So that's going to raise the cost, and obviously, if it costs more, it's probably not going to be as accessible to people because the prices are going to be higher, or that at least that's the simple logic behind it. So I love actually gathering all these constraints. I love adding the constraints also involved in the growing aspect of the grass, and the solar access or wind chill or shelter or something like that, and also also things like traffic flows where people, if the course is popular, it's getting high traffic, is it going to form tracks along near the greens or bottlenecks or what have you. So what I love is the creative challenge, when I've set all these constraints before me, and if I can come up with an unusually simple solution that honors all these constraints that I've just mentioned. And I think for me that's become, I guess, a positive creative challenge for me that keeps me engaged. And obviously when you want to set the bar high, so you want to tick all these boxes, and that should make, I think obviously it's the fun factor that we talked about. It is very important, but probably the golf course would never exist in the first place if it couldn't be built within the budget, and if it couldn't be maintained within a reasonable budget as well, so that you get reasonable grass quality.
Yeah, the ongoing maintenance is something most of us.
Yeah, so these two factors, I think, kind of almost rank a bit higher than even the fun. You don't. It's not an either or thing. The fun factor comes then naturally as in succession. But if you don't honor these two at the front, then there's not going to be a project, I guess. And I just love the challenge, creative challenge of trying to solve all these constraints. And I think
what you've outlined there
that's for many of us.
So is a lot like playing the game itself, Edwin. It's like solving a series of puzzles, isn't it? And with each shot, there's a whole new series of puzzles open up for the following shot. If the shot has gone where you wanted it to go, you're left with the puzzles that you expected to be faced with. And if it's gone where you didn't want it to go, there's a whole different set of questions now being asked, and they need to be solved based on a bunch of factors completely different to what you might have been expecting. Similar sort of thing with the notion of building a whole thing. It's solving puzzles, isn't it? There's a series of puzzles. You solve them one by one, and then you have to figure out, once you've ticked all of those boxes and solved those puzzles, what's left and what can you create with the space that you've now got. That'll be interesting for it's quite a big undertaking, isn't it? It must be.
And then in some cases you actually say, okay, that green site is just so spectacular that I'm going to make a conscious decision to set aside some of the constraints, or I'm just going to accept a certain risk. I've done that. For example, I've built a green in that gets limited sunlight because of the beautiful plantation around it or something, and in that particular case, I mean, I think we did the right thing, because it takes the player through a certain part of the site that you just would not want to miss. So even though that we have to have a certain other grass species on the green that is more shade tolerant and feels different in putting, and so there are obviously drawbacks to it. But on the whole, I think I'm glad that we did it, but it has its problems associated with it. So you always have to try and weigh your options as well, and that's obviously what makes it probably. There are no right or wrong answers. There's probably not a right or wrong design as well on a site. So, and that's also what's interesting as well. You never know if you've actually nailed it.
Of course not.
You never know if you actually went with because there's not a computer program that you can run and say, maximize this site, please.
That's exactly right. And let's hope we never get one, because I'm reminded when you talked about that green that you built, sometimes we need to keep in mind perfect. You don't want perfect to be the enemy of good, do you? And if you can't answer all the questions and you don't go ahead, who knows what you miss out on? Under those circumstances, you probably wouldn't get the road hole at St Andrews.
I think that's a fantastic example.
We moved the tee to the left because you can't hit over the hotel. That would be madness. In fact, that is over the railway sheds is in fact what makes the hole. One of the things that makes the hole fantastic.
I've got a soft spot for the road hole. I think I need to see a therapist about that, because I'm copying the road hole almost everywhere.
Well, it is almost the perfect golf hole, is it not? The road hole. It feels to me.
Yeah. I just recently did a flipped version of it on a drivable par 4, and now I've recently also done a par 5 version of it, a short par 5. Also a flipped one, because there were, in that case there's an old highway where it's a disused one where you can see the tracks, remnants of it, and bringing that back to life and sticking the green way up close to there, and it's fun. The road hole is extremely fun to work with, I think.
Yeah. People have, in fact, written books about it, and there'll probably be more books to come about it in the future. Yeah. So endlessly interesting, isn't it? Something you said there reminded me another sort of correlation with the game, with the course architect. You never know whether you've got it right. You never know whether laying up on that par 5 would have been a better idea either, do you? Whichever decision you make, whether you decide to go for it or whether you decide to lay up, you will never know what the other decision might have produced, and you have to live with that.
Let's say if you didn't go for it that day, you never know. Could I have made an eagle or?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And when you do go for it and you hit it in the front bunker and plug and you make a double bogey, you wonder whether if you'd laid up and hit a wedge, maybe you might have made a birdie. The options are endless.
What might have been.
Yeah, indeed. One of the things that strikes me about golf, the appeal of golf, Edwin, and I suspect it's one of the things that appeals to you, and I don't know why we do it, but we have this tendency to continue to try to, probably a little bit like we were saying before, take the adventurous edges off. It's the most free-form recreational game / pursuit in the world, golf is. There are almost no lines in golf. There is out of bounds on a couple of holes. Aside from that, you choose, should you want to, how, where, what. 4 players can stand on the tee, hit 4 different clubs, choose 4 different ways to play the hole. It's an incredibly free-form and exciting and thrilling game to play if you approach it a certain way, isn't it? Much more so than football or any of the track and field sports, or even tennis, where the lines are very defined. The only real questions in games like tennis and football, was it in or was it out? That's it. In golf, the questions are almost endless. In terms of sport, it feels to me golf is the most cerebral pursuit of them all. It engages the brain in a way other sports simply can't because of those reasons.
Yeah, I think that's definitely it's that unique element that I think makes it so charming, and I think this is you're mentioning things here that I've naturally given a lot of thought to. The unique nature of golf, the flexibility of it, the free form nature of it, because of that's why we first spoke, really. I think it was, if my calculations are correct, 11 years ago I was on your show first.
That would make us both much older than we'd like to be, Edwin.
Yeah, we're not getting any younger, at least.
No, we're not.
We're wiser, Rod. That's
well, I'm not even sure about that. Refresh my memory. I know it was a long time ago, but I can't remember why we first came together.
Yes, it was at the time when I had the first written about a concept that the working title has ever since been Why 18 Holes.
Of course, yes.
And that was my argument was that we to address many of the challenges that we've already talked about here today, that we should consider allowing ourselves to get used to the thought that golf courses, as they had in for centuries, for each golf course to have their own unique number of holes simply based on the landscape, the terrain, and the site it sits on. And that's obviously how golf was played for hundreds of years. I mean, Montrose had 25 holes, St Andrews had 22, Prestwick had 13. And then there were golf courses with fewer holes than that. And it was simply a result of obviously the land, the resources that each group of people that was behind the course, what they had to work with. And it was just sort of, it felt like a very honest approach to the game, and just capitalizing fully on that unique aspect of it, like you said. Because, and since then, by accident, really, if you look at it, we standardized the game, or the round of golf, that is. It became 18 holes, and I think or nine as a consequence of 18. And that it seems to have that course of action seems to have been taken almost more as an accident. When in 1854 the new rules were issued for the old course, but they were meant to be only for that particular golf course, and those rules said that one match is 18 holes. And then, because of the influential nature of the old course, other clubs started copying that. And 100 years before that, they had shortened their golf course from 22 to 18 for other reasons.
Yes. Yeah. Are you suggesting, Edwin, that 100 and something years before Instagram, St Andrews was an influencer? Is this what you're telling me? The first influencer, perhaps?
It was an influencer. I think you're right. Yeah, and the first influencer.
The first influencer.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. And the idea is so logical that you lay out there, Edwin. Find a piece of land that you want to build a golf course on, and build the number of holes that is best for that piece of land. Even the most intelligent person could not argue against that logically. Here's a piece of land, and these 16 holes would perfectly fill this, and they would be 16 extremely good holes. And yet, very well the pushback that comes from golf that says, no, you must fit 18 holes on that piece of land, even if it is to the detriment of 4 of the other holes that you've already drawn that would make it fantastic.
Yes.
We hold so tightly to this notion of 18 or 19, including in the marketplace. There's a very real financial. It is difficult to convince people, or it would be, to go and golfers, long established golfers, difficult to convince them to go and play a golf course that was 15 holes, even if they were 15 unbelievably good golf holes. You would struggle.
Yeah. Yes, I think I agree. I agree with you, and obviously I've got now 13 years of speaking to people about this, and actually some people just get angry. And I think I've lost work because of this. And but I think it's a tremendously interesting situation, and I think we would be able to address almost all of the current challenges in the game by adopting this greater flexibility. And what I like about it is that we're not really. It's not like we're trying to invent something new here or reinvent the wheel or something like that. I mean, we've got a game that's long-standing, and we're actually, by doing this, we would be honoring the true roots of it, because it was played, as if you call it, random numbers of holes, or it was played that way for far longer than we've played the standardized game. Yeah, it depends on, it would help address the competition for land and resources in the urban environment. It would, and then in a more simplistic way or purer way, it would just simply allow the architect to build better holes for less money, because you're using more of what the land is already giving you. And it's shorter walks from green to tee. It's more entertaining golf holes for less. So you get a better product for less money. And in most industries, I would think that that's a good idea. But okay.
But you've been around
fine.
golf long enough to know, Edwin, that that's not how we do things in golf.
Yeah. I think it's coming back to emotions. And then obviously also the TV effect. I just basically what I need now is a crazy marketing director for a large firm who is the sponsor of a tour event to actually go out there and stage one event over a number.
In all seriousness, is there an opportunity there for a disruptor? It's a word I find predominantly distasteful, but is there an opportunity for a disruptor in the market to perhaps start a movement in this direction?
Yeah, we're advertising for one right now.
Fabulous. Okay,
yeah, let's do that.
Fingers crossed.
Through your show. Thank you for lending me your show to do that, Rod.
I'm not sure how much influence it has, Edwin, but I hope that somebody out there is listening, because it is interesting. Is the website y18holes.com still live and running?
Yes.
I absolutely recommend people go and have a read. There is some fabulous and fascinating stuff on there. Interesting tidbits about the history of the game that people would not have ever known, and why it makes so much sense, the notion of y18holes.com. So congratulations to you on that.
You're very kind, Rod. I put a little bit of at least a big milestone in that work was 2.5 years ago now, where we at the USGA's Innovation Symposium in Tokyo, we jointly announced, because we had been working together leading up to that with the golf handicapping and course rating people at the USGA, because obviously a lot of us know that we now have the world handicapping system. And in its development, I mean, obviously for the first time, we finally have a worldwide system where we had 7 or 8 systems before. We were now able to enable people under the new system to play any number of golf holes to a handicap. From each national federation will have discretion in that. I mean, if they want to go from 9 down to 7 holes, that's the minimum. And then from 7 holes, you can play any number of holes to a handicap now. So that was a big milestone for us, and we worked together to develop this and to get this into the new system now. And we jointly announced that in Tokyo in 2019. So that was a big, I think big moment for that project.
Tiff Tough Hybrid Bermuda. Tough by name, tough by nature. This sports turf variety supplied by Lawn Solutions Australia is taking sport to another level. With superior drought tolerance, speedy recovery and toughness, Tiff Tough really is the smart grass. For more information and your nearest supplier, head to lawnsolutionsaustralia.com.au. You've led me neatly, Edwin, to something that I did want to ask you about. And I think there may be some cultural things. I think Australia has a somewhat unique golf culture, as in it's different to the golf culture that you find in the UK. And I think there's a very definite golf culture in the UK. There's a definite golf culture in the US. There's a definite golf culture here. I feel like there's a golf culture in the Nordic countries as well. Iceland, Norway, Sweden. Probably we think particularly probably of Sweden, but I think Iceland is probably similar. It's a different approach to the game, perhaps more relaxed in some ways than we have even here in Australia. We play a lot of competition golf here in Australia. The Golf Union of Iceland, I think, is the administrative body there, announced, I think, in 2017, tournaments could be played over any number of holes that the club or tournament organiser chose. If you wanted to have a 12-hole tournament, you could, and that would be a legitimate tournament. You would have a riot in Australia if you suggested that. Is there something culturally that allows innovation and a different way of thinking about the game in your part of the world that we perhaps could really do with taking note of in other parts of the golf world?
Well, there was a riot.
Was there?
Well, I'm not. Well, kind of. But the thing, what the Golf Union did was that at a similar time, obviously they're influenced by frequent visits made by myself to the offices. So
yes. You are a very influential golf type.
no, they've had to listen to the same guy, babbling with the same old stuff every day, every time. But what happened was that the national match play championship was held in the Westman Islands, and what sparked this kind of maybe a unique approach to that event was that we'll be honest about that. Some of the greens on the coastal greens had been suffering due to salt spray that year. So, and we just said, okay, I mean, why do we bother the players, putting those greens? Why don't we just play around them and just leave them out? So we just basically rerouted the course to include 13 holes that were well connected to one another, and we played the matches as 13-hole matches. And it was an interesting dynamic. I think in hindsight, the players, they didn't dislike it. I think they were able to putt on better greens. They were the matches were you had to play well from the start. There was a big learning curve in that, and it was very interesting. There were slightly more matches that went to extra holes because the odds are higher that the match is tied because you haven't played as many. So it was very interesting. I think it went very well, and as a result of that, the Golf Union decided to omit from all their regulations for each tournament that they have, the junior match play, the main match play event, or the stroke play or national stroke play, and the team events, that they just omitted from every regulation the reference to the number of holes, so that they no longer have they are no longer bound by the 18.
It's not stipulated. Club,
it's not stipulated. That's true.
Organizer can decide.
So that was in many ways a very symbolic move, but that was all it was. But we did stage that tournament, so it was a national championship that was played over 13 holes, which, and obviously I'm very glad actually that it happened in my home country, and it did go well. So there was nothing in that exercise that suggested that it shouldn't or couldn't be done. And the fact that it happened on my 40th birthday was completely irrelevant.
It's a total coincidence, Edwin. And where did the riot come? Was not everybody happy with the notion?
It was, just social media chatter, basically. And that went along with similar lines. What we've talked about, what you talked about earlier on this program now, is that people wanted to compare golf to football or tennis, or they said it's like playing without the penalty box on one side or something like that. And while obviously our logic is that we were capitalizing on the truly unique aspect of golf, that it's unlike any other game, like you said before, and obviously paying a truer homage to the roots, like I said before. So
people always throw those comparisons, don't they? Anytime you suggest anything that people think is radical in golf, there's a whole generation, or it seems a whole cohort of golfers who want the game to have much more fixed lines. Much more. A championship golf course must have 4 par 5s, 4 par 3s, and be a par of 72. Otherwise, it's not a proper, quote-unquote, golf course. You miss out on so much when you make these sorts of guiding parameters that are so strident, don't you? Golf misses out on so much. You don't have Shiskin and the island of Arran, 12 holes.
And I think that's why, I think those who are, skeptical of the idea or against it for some reason, I think I've tried to encourage them to really consider, why do you think we're talking about this? Why do you think we're doing this? We're trying to increase our ability to create a playground that you enjoy more. So, because if you're constrained, if you're bound to to that exact number of holes coming back to the clubhouse, and even more than once. You've got 2 loops of 9 and all these constraints, and that just simply means that you have to make sacrifices here and there. You'll probably have to leave out that beautiful par 3 that sat in a natural pocket somewhere because it just, you ended up with too many holes. Or obviously we've found a way to do that at Barnbougle and things like that, and places like that, a European club in Ireland, and we've got the extra holes where people just don't want to walk past them without having a hit. But it's basically that. It's sometimes you want to route golf holes through a certain piece of the property that would simply just end up with too many or too few, but meaning that you would probably miss out on being able to walk through a very charming part of the site, or having certain vistas to look at, or it's like you said. It's just, I think it's hard for people to actually imagine what we would gain from going back to this simple approach.
Yeah, I think it's probably the one thing Mackenzie might change about the legacy that he left in golf was that one line in the 13 Principles about the returning nines. I think he might have even said that afterwards. Not that he necessarily regretted writing it, but he perhaps regretted the effect that it had, the impact that it had on a bunch of people.
I think that's my only edit.
That's right.
13
the rest
principles.
Is perfect. We make them 12 and leave it at that. I mentioned Mike Clayton before, and I'm going to mention him again. You would follow Mike on Twitter, and he does something which I think is really interesting that I think a lot of people find really interesting. He likes to take photos when he's out on the golf course of holes that aren't holes.
Yeah.
Imagine if we played from this tee to that green. I actually think there's room, if we were to do that, if every club in the world every now and then did that with their golf course, said, right, we're going to play from the first green to the second tee, the first tee to the second green today. That brings back, because then nobody's got any notion of par, do they? It brings back and shows to people how much fun that can be. You're not worried about whether you make 5, 6 or 7 because there's no expectation being set on the tee. It'd be a wonderful experiment for most golfers to try, wouldn't it, from time to time?
Yeah. When you say that, there was a club that I belonged to once that did this every year, one day a year. So yeah, and I think it's a lovely idea, and I think I'll go right now once we finish talking and promote it.
Yeah. I tell you the other thing I'd love to see, Ed. I'm not sure whether you do this in Iceland. In Australia, every month we have the monthly medal. It's the only stroke play event. We play stable for almost every other competition, and so that Saturday of the month, the golf course is set up at its absolute longest, with the pins in the hardest position. It's the monthly medal. It's the most difficult round of the month. I am absolutely convinced that once a year, the monthly medal should in fact be off the forwardmost tees to the easiest pins. Once a year, just once a year, and see how everybody enjoys it. It's the same test for everybody. You still have the same competition. Everybody's playing the same golf course. And if it's as easy as people think, well, even the 10 markers will shoot under par, won't they?
Well, it's that idea with where people associate difficulty with quality, which seems to be very common in golf, and that's obviously something.
But it can be true. This is the problem. Pine Valley, I remember Mike Clayton telling me, Pine Valley and Pinehurst, I think he said, are the 2 most difficult golf courses he's ever played. They're also 2 of the best. But causation and correlation and that whole notion, just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's good, does it? The 10th hole at Royal Melbourne West is a very difficult golf hole. The driver will par 4 over the huge blowout bunker. For most of it's a very difficult golf hole. It's an awkward tee shot. It's a difficult approach for the double-digit handicap player. But it's a great hole despite its difficulty and perhaps because of its difficulty as well. And I wonder how much that influences this notion that the more difficult you make it, the better it must be.
Yeah. Well, I have a little bit of a problem. I think we talk about this. We've obviously, for years we've and I think many of us have agreed, that this and that course is the best. But if you really think about, okay, I mean, who are the ones, including us, who are ranking these courses sort of informally and agreeing on which ones are the most desirable to emulate and the ones that are considered the best. Almost all of us, we're we've played the game for a while. We were fairly skilled at it. So we can navigate these courses without being stuck out there for hours searching for balls, or, playing one sculled shot after the next and just really getting into trouble and perhaps losing the enjoyment that the high handicapper would probably. But if you look at the largest customer group, that's the last time I checked. The average handicap for men was 29 point something, and more than 40 for women. And obviously trying to increase the ratio of women in the game. If you look at the swing speeds for many women in golf, there's very little lift in the shot. The ball needs a large landing area to stop, and so hazards in front of greens and things like that, you're kind of almost bound to. We could even just put the tee back behind the green, because that's where they're bound to hit over the green always, and they're chipping back. So the more I've thought about our largest customer group, the high handicappers, it seems like they feel that they don't have a voice. They are not allowed to express themselves and tell and say what they, if they like this or that course, because they assume a certain responsibility to improve it at the game before they can have a say. If you took a high handicapper to Pine Valley, they wouldn't enjoy it.
No.
So is Pine Valley then a good golf course? I'm just putting this out there.
I appreciate what you're saying. So you've raised something very interesting, which is golf's pecking order, isn't it? Golf has a pecking order.
Yeah, you could say that.
And the better you are physically at the game, the higher up the pecking order you sit, which to me makes people like Mike Clayton, I think of again, particularly important. A man who's made his living playing the game for the best part of 30 years, so that is an extraordinary talent, who understands the game at a level, as you're discussing, for a much broader range of people who, you're right, feel they don't have a voice. You would have heard this yourself. I'm not good enough to have lessons yet. People will tell you when they find out that you're not good enough to have lessons yet.
I put out a survey once, just a test sort of online survey, and I tried to get my mother-in-law, and I tried to get, some of the older ladies to respond, because I wanted to hear what they have to say. And she said, "No, I'm not good enough to even participate in the survey." So I was like, just tell me, I need to hear that voice, and because that's the core group that, if a golf course is to thrive, it needs to appeal to that group. And you could actually, it's not an either or, but you could actually say that, in order to be considered a top golf course, you need to accommodate that group. Otherwise it's just, it's a niche course.
Yes. Only for good players.
And Pine Valley is a niche course.
Oh, absolutely it is, yes.
And it just happens to appeal to the most influential group, the loudest voices, and not the largest. We should appeal to the largest groups, not the loudest groups.
Does the largest group have a responsibility to get better? There was a very interesting.
Well, they assume that, I think.
Do they?
But they don't. I think they assume that. I think that's what Callaway Golf found in their market research in the 80s, is that, when they were on the way to develop the larger heads and things, a part of the feedback that they got is that the new players, so the higher handicaps, they assumed a certain responsibility to improve it. They saw that the equipment was obviously challenging to play with, and the courses were challenging to play, but they accepted that. They accepted that as that they just had to improve. And I wonder now, because today and even more so in the future, a land and resource demanding game like golf has an ethical responsibility to be accessible and easily adopted. And that's what I think, at least. And that's why I think that element is becoming ever more important. It doesn't mean that we have to change everything that we're doing. It might also, some other things might help. For example, the size of the golf ball is, if you look it up, there is no maximum on the size of the golf ball, at least last time I checked. So, for example, one way to do it would be, for example, when you have new players, high handicappers, their swing speeds are very low. So let's say if they had a larger ball, a considerably larger ball, with more area on the lower hemisphere to hit and get airborne.
How big would you be thinking? Tennis ball size, or halfway between golf ball and tennis ball?
Not quite. I mean, it would probably have to be somewhere in between, I guess, a golf ball and a tennis ball. But just a noticeably larger, easily. Okay. Yeah. And to me, it should be a natural part of the game for high handicappers or new players to start with a large ball and then just working their way to the main ball.
A beginner's ball.
Because a larger golf ball is not as aerodynamic in many ways, but it doesn't hurt because their swing speed is so low. They're not losing any distance, and they're actually gaining distance if they hit it in the right hemisphere. So, I think all of these things would help us.
Yeah.
So I think that's just one of many steps that could be taken to make the game more accessible and easily adopted. Because I think I'm not trying to, in describing this or suggesting this, I'm not trying to take away any of the charm that the game offers to people who have played the game for a long time and are reasonably skilled at it. I think we, the two of us, are in that group. Just been in it for so long, and it's not taking anything away from us. We're just making it more approachable, and I think like I said, the ethical responsibility that golf has now, using all that land and resources, I think it's going to be very, very important.
It needs to make a return on investment, doesn't it? Two things about that. Well, one thing I'd like to say about that. The other great thing about that, Redwin, is don't make the hole any bigger and we'll get a generation of much better putters. They'll naturally get better at putting if they've got to put a bigger ball into a smaller hole. So that'll be one good thing. But it's interesting what you say about golf's place in society going forward, because this is really what we're talking about. As you say, it's a heavily resource-dependent luxury is golf. So what's its place going to be? You mentioned right at the very start that you think golf is a vehicle for so much more than just a recreational pursuit. What are some of those things you're talking about when you say that? I agree with you, but I'd like to hear what you think golf can give beyond just the playing of the game for some interest and a bit of fun.
Yeah. First of all, let's say, okay, in doing this, we're assuming that the golf course is reasonably well located, planned, designed, and built and maintained. And that comes down to, where it is, obviously, in terms of accessibility, what kind of soils it's using, if it's, so that's important. We'll come back to that I think a bit later on. But first and foremost, I look at I'm fascinated by the public health element. It's the walking on a soft, reasonably rolling surface for hours on end, with a heart rate, especially for the older groups, with a heart rate that's very close to the recommended exercise rate by doctors. When and the thing about golf, like you say, the thing about golf is that
as though there's one thing about golf, Edwin. That's right.
the thing about golf,
yeah, that's right,
is that you wouldn't go out there and walk on that type of surface for that long unless you were chasing a golf ball. You just simply wouldn't. And I mean, okay, in some cases you probably would be, but then you're probably walking on asphalt or gravel or something like that.
You'd have to be madder to walk a golf course and not play golf than you have to be to actually walk a golf course and play golf.
Okay, I'll give you that. You can do that. Yeah. If that floats your boat, then fine. Okay, you can walk. But as architects, we often walk the courses with a camera instead of playing them. So, which is which is, I think, tells you a little bit how weird we
That
can
health
be.
aspect, Edwin, is hugely underrated, isn't it? I don't think it's understood
Yes.
by the people who need to understand it in governments and decision-making bodies.
Yes.
How important that health aspect is. And that's partly due to one of golf's great problems, which is its image. Non-golfers assume that all golfers ride around in golf carts. Now, too many do. That is true. But if we encouraged more people to walk, there are genuine and very real health benefits to be had. You're right. And
Yes.
we do not sell that aspect.
Obviously
of the
there
game.
is some walking involved and some exercise, even though if you use a cart, but much less, obviously. And then what I think is important is that we try to keep the courses as walkable as possible, to delay a person's shift from walking to the cart. I mean, once you get very old and your mobility decreases. So the cart in that respect is a gift as well. If it can help a lot of the oldest people to enjoy the game. So I think if we can keep golf carts to confined to that purpose, that would be fantastic. But the walkability of the course is tremendously important. And I think to me, it's been interesting. I've tried to quantify that more when I'm designing something new or even just analyzing existing courses. I'm measuring the walking distance from green to tee, and more importantly, the climb. Actually, the cases where you're walking uphill, how much and in what gradient, and trying to work that out if that's within reasonable limits or not. So I think that's an interesting. I think it's something that we should be using more as a tool to help us evaluate or between routing proposals or things like that. The public health element is, in my view, one that I'm probably most fascinated with, and probably the hardest hitting element in terms of the contribution of golf to our communities. So that's obviously huge. Then, secondly, I would say tourism-wise. Both domestic and international. What's interesting in tourism is that you've got reports from Scotland, Gulf Scotland and Ireland and other places that say that a traveling golfer spends 3 to 4 times more on a trip than your typical traveler. So the golf could be used much more systematically to in your tourism authority's quest for quality over quantity in tourism, because in many countries now over tourism is a thing where you've got too much traffic going on in near natural attractions and things like that, and obviously pollution and the way how we travel, and then if we travel alone or in groups or by plane or by boat or what have you. But golf is a way to attract, at least get the eyes and ears of a traveler that, golf is a public sport, fortunately, in many parts of the world, but in some places it's a way to focus on people who have money to spend. So in this regard, we can use that to our advantage and use golf systematically to appeal to tourists that would come and they would use and they would buy other services. They would use, they would take a rental car. They will stay in the hotels. They're going to the restaurants and the museums, and they're doing stuff. So that's obviously something that I'm interested as well. So we've got public health, we've got tourism, and then we've got the let's say the green space, your city's green space and the use of green space. And I think that's also very fascinating, and I think that's probably something you've touched on now with some recent newspaper articles and discussions that I've seen from your Twitter accounts, from Michael Clayton's and some other Australian friends, is that there seems to have been a discussion about what to do with certain areas in your cities and towns that now have golf courses, and there have been plans to maybe close them up, and that's obviously been taking place in many countries. Similar discussions. I think that what we are failing to communicate is that a golf course, and maybe also failing in executing in a better way, is that golf courses can be mixed with other land uses in a much more in a much better way than we, I think, that we actually do in many places, allowing others to enjoy these landscapes as well through the well-designed public footpaths, bridle ways, using golf courses as outdoor classrooms for nearby schools, and things like that. So there are so many ways to do this, and in doing that, obviously we're sharing the space, which is a tremendously important thing. But it's also making golf more visible. It's breaking down the barriers that we know that have existed. Let's say how do people know what's their acquaintance of to golf? I mean, are they driving past a golf course on their way to work where they see private property, keep out, they see a fence up, or things like that, and then they go home and they watch the news, and then there was last weekend's tournament, and the guy is holding up a huge check in front of a fountain. It says money, it says resource use, water use, green expanses, and then you're watching a movie in the evening, and that's two high-level executives making shady deals on the golf course. So that's kind of what, So breaking down these barriers, allowing others to use the sites as well with us. And that actually produces a very interesting dynamic. And that turns the golf course into a public park. And one that the city, it depends on the business model though, if it's a truly municipal course that the city's running, okay. But the golf course is paying for the maintenance of that park. If it didn't have a golf course, you'd have to put the maintenance of all that area on your city's budget. Like I say, golfers are people too. Often
Yes.
we don't count the usage hours amongst the golfers. I mean, because let's say if one person visits a golf course, that's almost like 5 usage hours, right?
Yes.
So and
that would be an interesting study. I've always thought, Edwin, of how many minutes per day a public park, a football field, and a golf course, broken down by the space that they occupy, what's their return on investment in terms of time used by residents. I think golf would stand up reasonably well. Most football fields in particular are pretty much empty Monday to Friday, morning till there might be some training during the evenings for some of the local teams, but there's a lot of time that football pitches in particular don't do anything. Parks are often not particularly well populated. There are times when it's busy. And I think golf, round the clock, 24/7, probably holds up reasonably well in a mathematical formula about that. But it's interesting the things that you're talking about there. This is what strikes me, and this is, I think, what the difficulty is for those of us within golf. Those changes that you're talking about are the ones that need to come from within golf.
Yeah.
They are golf's responsibility. It's not up to non-golfers to educate themselves about golf. Mm-hmm. They can take the images they see. I probably have completely incorrect beliefs about sailing, for example. I would imagine sailing is extremely expensive. It's for a small, rich set of people who live near the water in our major cities, which is the most expensive real estate. That would be an assumption many people would make. It may not be the case. It's not my job to go and investigate that. If somebody's sitting at home and has a poor image of golf, it's not their job to go and change it. It's the job of golf and golfers to change that. And golf doesn't do a good job of that, and golfers don't do a good job. In fact, we do a terrible job, because often the reaction when there's any suggestion about a golf course closing by golfers is not to say, well, hang on, how can we share the place? It's to say, hands off. Leave our golf course alone. Don't come in here. There's a real danger for golf that we will talk ourselves out of communities if we're not careful.
That's what's happening. Because we're always talking to ourselves. Like we're doing now, we're kind of talking we're talking our way into obviously keeping the golf courses, but we need to to do the same externally. So
Yes.
yeah. So I mean,
because golf has a case to make, doesn't it? It has a good case to make. We just need to make it.
I mean, absolutely. And I think if we can just make sure that because there's probably a fork in the road now. Okay, let's just make sure that we choose the fork or the road that will include more of these elements that we've talked about that are sort of belong to the idea of responsible golf, right? Be proactive. Don't just go out and suddenly reach out to other stakeholders near you when you're in trouble. Make an effort to invite other stakeholders to a meeting in the clubhouse, for a coffee, and say, because one thing, there's a horse riding club that we near one of the courses I was working on that wanted to expand. And, and there's a rich tradition in Iceland for sort of horse riding and sort of countryside horse riding on paths, extensive path networks, run here and there. And we just invited them to the clubhouse and said, here's the thing, we would really like to expand the golf course and things like that. But okay, here we're just trying to get a better understanding of the needs of others in our community. And so we would just ask them to tell us what their dream vision was. And they just told us that they really wanted to get a bridle path to run from here to there. And that's what they were trying to get the town to do and things like that. And then we just said, okay, can't we just try and build that into what we're doing? And we might need to build a haul road, to build the course. And could you use that afterwards? And things like that. And you wouldn't believe the different tone and atmosphere that was enjoyed sort of afterwards. It was so much easier to work with. And
collaboration.
We just got a whole new power there in the community that was on our side, and I think we were able to convince them that we were genuine about that what we were doing would have a positive influence on our community. And if you get people on board with that, it's just a completely different thing.
Be a good neighbour, Edwin. Be a good neighbour
exactly.
As a golf course.
And I think what it does is that for all of us, I mean, we, all the people that are working in the club, whether it's the ones who get paid for it and the ones who are doing it as volunteers, it gives you a whole new dimension. The passion, there's another level to the passion. You suddenly realize that you're not only able to, enjoy working in golf, your favorite sport and that kind of thing, but you're also able to enjoy and realize that what you're doing is actually for the greater good. And I think I found that that energizes people in a whole new way, because we don't want to be a liability. We want to be part of the solution, right? So I think I found that very fascinating, and that's what I love to be a part of. And I think lastly, because we've now talked about public health, we've talked about tourism, we've talked about the urban green space, and then we can also talk about the environmental impact in the larger context. And what's very interesting now is that, again, assuming that the golf course is in the right place in terms of what kind of soil it's using, and that's the climate, obviously the all-encompassing climate issues, climate action, climate crisis, whatever you want to call it. And it's just simply, I think, obviously we know that there's conflicting opinions here. But if we stick with the science, it's saying that there's too much CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that's causing unstable weather and all these other challenges that we are facing even on a day-to-day basis. So to start at the beginning, now a big part of the solution for us as mankind now is to try and convert or suck CO2 and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and lock it in the soil or biomass or whatever, what have you. And now we're living in a very interesting time now, because especially for those who are fascinated about golf and want golf to do well, is that mown grass can actually store carbon in the soil and biomass just like trees do.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And what is interesting, we've never actually thought about, because it's maybe too close to us, is that golf courses have been mowing fairways and mown roughs so frequently for decades, even hundreds of years. Well, I'll say decades, the mowing technology, right? We're mowing them so frequently so that we leave the clippings in the sward because they're so small. They can be left in, and they actually break down and as nutrition, and they contribute to the buildup of carbon in the soil. So that's a very unique practice, because very, very few others in our communities are mowing grass that frequently and leaving it in. Almost nobody. The big thing is that with new technology, electric robotic mowers, almost everyone else will be able to do that, is already able to do that, and will be able to do that in coming years. Municipalities will be able to use the same approach to maintain highway medians or public parks or private parks, private gardens and home lawns and things like that. So basically what we're seeing that already golf courses are, if they're on the right soil, you'll have, let's say, if you're on wetlands, if you've drained wetlands to accommodate your farm or your golf course, what have you, you are lowering the water table, which means that more oxygen gets in touch with a greater depth in the soil, and that means that you release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So if you can avoid the use of wetlands, fantastic. On mineral soils, including sand, which we associate with quality in golf, that is where you're most likely storing considerable levels of carbon in your fairways and mown roughs. So a golf course is and should be considered more a carbon sink in our in our communities. And especially now when the mowing technology is becoming cleaner. So the actual carbon footprint of your operations is going down, because we're now going into more electricity, even off-grid electricity, where your robotic mowers, like the small Roomba vacuum cleaners, that's basically many countless small ones like that. And they charge themselves in charging stations that could be on solar panels yes, because obviously you need daylight for the grass to grow, so it's associated with so we're hopefully seeing that golf courses can be redefined in our communities as carbon sinks, which will be obviously a huge thing. It already is and will be even more so. So I think obviously now we're going. It's a bit technical here, but we've now at least talked about 4 pillars of the idea of how golf can contribute beyond golf, and I think each of these 4 is underutilized today. So
yeah, couldn't agree more. And of course, none of those things, Edwin, have anything to do with drawing and building interesting golf holes, which is technically kind of your job as a golf course architect. But it's funny how this game gets under the skin, isn't it? And you start to think about it in ways totally unrelated to the area that you might be practicing in. The whole game gets under your skin, doesn't it? And you can't help but be taken by it all. Last thing for me, because I've taken more of your time than I meant to.
No. I'm not in a hurry at all. I enjoy very much, because I think it's nutrition really to talk about these things, to exchange ideas, and so please.
Nutrition.
Go ahead.
That's a lovely idea, Edwin. Beautiful. Is it difficult for me to get to Iceland for a golf holiday? And is Iceland set up for me to come for a golf holiday? Are the courses accessible? Where should I play? What's it going to cost me?
Yeah, Iceland. Yes, I mean there are flights from all the major airports obviously in the U.S. and in Europe on the mainland. London, Paris, Stockholm, and then
Probably
and
not
others.
Sydney direct, I don't think. It
No.
probably can't fly Sydney, Reykjavik, I don't think.
Not direct, no. But I mean, when I did it, it was through London. It was London, Dubai. That was what I did, and I always remember that because a bit of a story for you. When we went, I actually on the way home I actually went from Wellington, so it was Wellington, Sydney, Dubai, London, Reykjavik.
London. Yeah.
And when we sat on the tarmac, we watched a full movie on the tarmac in Wellington because we missed the weather window to take off from that particular, from a certain runway because the residents.
Windy Wellington, they call it. It's one of the windiest cities in the world, Wellington, yeah.
I was awake for a full work week on that trip home, so that was interesting. But yes, when you're in the country, I mean, the courses are very accessible. All of them are public. And obviously in the city, they have a tendency to be there's a tendency to have large volume of traffic because of the popularity and obviously the lack of new golf courses in the city because I mean we're obviously competing with others for space. But you should always be able to get on in the evenings, for example, to play some midnight golf or just evening golf, and so that's fine. And then as you go outside the city, there's much more availability. And then price wise, I mean, especially the courses that have so much traffic in the city, they're kind of almost using their green fees for people outside the clubs as a tool to manage the traffic. So they'll have a tendency to have a higher green fee. So in that case, I mean, you're talking about about $100 or something like that.
US, $100.
Yeah, US, yeah.
About 1,000.
Well, yeah, not even. I would even say maybe Australian. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So there you go. So good value. Which side of the road do you drive on?
We drive on the right side, Rod.
The incorrect
right
side, you mean? The incorrect side. The side
but I meant
we're not
maybe
used to.
what I wanted to maybe add to this is that when you go outside the city, the green fee dramatically drops, and you'll probably looking at $40 or something like that.
Okay. As an experience, Edwin, I mean, apart from anything, what a wonderfully adventurous or adventure it would be to go to a place like it. Most of us who think about a golf holiday, the first place you think of is Scotland. And if you've been to Scotland, Ireland, parts of England, and then the next place you think of when you're in this hemisphere is maybe America. You might go to Pinehurst and Bandon Dunes. We all know the names. You can rattle off the places you'd like to go. There's something wonderfully appealing about the adventure of going to somewhere like Iceland. I know that there's been a few stories written and videos made. People have done it, and it just looks amazing. I think there's a market there for it somehow. There's enough adventurous spirit left in golf, I think. And what will we see? As I said, I've seen some photos of amazing-looking golf courses in Iceland. What sorts of things might we see if we come to Iceland? What will the golf remind us of? You said New Zealand earlier, the South Island.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's two worlds. You're playing golf in the city where it's more what you're used to, though. I mean, it's more professionally run. There's more people around. There's more staff. There's more traffic. But still, you get up close to some really interesting, nature. You're on the coast. The crashing waves. Or you're playing in lava. Where if you go off the fairway, you're in lava. So it's a new challenge for you. And just that variety of landscapes, sandy beaches, clifftop coastlines. Then as you go outside the city, there's a completely different world out there. I mean, that almost becomes like a golfing playground somehow. It's more quirky courses, more natural. Some of them are in sort of cultural landscapes like farmland, but still sort of leaning into mountainsides and interesting lava or rocky outcroppings and hillsides and natural brooks and streams that you can hear the sounds of the trickling water and the crashing waterfalls and things like that. You can get close to natural attractions that you don't really find in many other places, and also if you're into that kind of thing, you'll be playing maybe if you if you're playing sort of in the early evenings, you might be playing with a local fisherman or a farmer or so, it's where people come together, after work in these smaller towns, for example. And that's, I think, what I find of an extremely fascinating environment. And that's where you can really feel how sort of mainstream the game has become, or in the sense that it's a truly public game. It's played by everyone. And, in the same group, you'll have a lawyer or a doctor and a fisherman or a farmer and a plumber. So, I mean, for me, that's just fantastic. And
one of golf's most wonderful aspects, isn't it? That notion that the mechanic can be a better golfer than the lawyer, and both can get on the golf course in a way that they wouldn't in another social setting.
Even though the lawyer would beg to differ.
That's right. He could make a case, give him a day or two, and he'll find some facts that'll.
Yeah. And it's also that also brings you to the mental benefits, the benefits in mental health. Is that for many people who have reached a certain age, isolation becomes a big worry. Maybe you've lost your spouse. For many, having the ability to go out there and play with others and meet your friends and enjoying that healthy exercise and social interaction is just you just priceless. Can't put a price on it.
No, it's priceless. Edwin, I always love talking to you, and I have loved talking to you again today, and I hope more people come to follow you on Twitter and read some of your writings. Your website has quite a few essays, I think, from memory, that you've written over time about golf and some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, hopefully I do a fairly decent job of keeping them all in the same place. It's a healthy reminder, speaking to you now, that I should maybe have a look at and maybe making sure that I tidy things up a little bit.
It's hard to keep up with everything, but I do recommend people go to Y18 Holes. Where else can we find you quickly before we go? On social media and the internet, where can we find Edwin Roald and his thoughts?
Yeah. My Twitter is Edwin Roald and most of the social media as well. And then my small, modest company is called Eureka Golf. So that's eureka.golf. We have a golf URL now. And then lastly, for those who are interested in following maybe the progress in the what we talked about in the climate and the carbon research.
Yes, please.
That's our scientific research project called Carbon Par. So the website for that is carbonpar.org.
Carbonpar.org.
So that's where we're hoping to offer easy to understand statistics on how much you can store of carbon, where you are in the world, what kind of geographical location, soils, and things like that. So.
Hugely important, Edwin, and much more important for the next generation, I think. We're of a generation that's maybe between the generation that thinks all that stuff is made up and a hoax, and the generation coming behind us thinks it's the most important thing in the world, and we're somewhere in between, but it's important. No doubt it's going to be.
When you speak to them, when you speak to the younger people, I always get, I'm frequently surprised as to how much they're thinking about these things, and it's our duty just to to accommodate that. I mean, we have to leave stuff behind, so that people can work with it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous to catch up, my friend. Thank you for taking some time. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Rod. Thanks so much.
Well, if you didn't do a Google image search of golf in Iceland while you were listening to that, I cannot urge you strongly enough to do so immediately. What a mesmerising and fascinating landscape for the game it looks to be. I hope you found that wide-ranging discussion with Edwin interesting and thought-provoking. As he said towards the end, it's this type of talk which is nutrition for the game, and we all have a role to play in shaping what golf will look like in the future. Well, that's it for episode 51 of the show, but I hope you've made the effort to follow us on whatever app you prefer, because on episode 52, John Huggan brings us a lively discussion with the author of some of the very best golf content in the history of the game.
And how the thing about golf is it should really be things about golf, plural, because it has this overarching sort of thing that's really made me who I am.
That's Guy Yoakum, former editor of the My Shot column, next time on The Thing About Golf.